What's your take on adult children struggling to find motivation to be self-sufficient and get out of their parents' homes?
This is a question that I would ask a few more questions to really understand the nature of the question. But if it's how did we get there, I would answer the question differently. If it's what to do about it, sometimes, like my mom used to say, which always made me laugh, but she would say you have to poop in the nest, which is only somebody who's into birds would probably understand. But mother birds would literally make the nest so uncomfortable that the birds would be forced to jump out and fly, be forced to leave the nest and figure it out, which is simply a way of saying make living at home so uncomfortable that they would rather go try their hand at taking care of themselves. Also, as parents, and I am a parent, I have three boys, you have to be aware of where you are unconsciously or potentially consciously enabling them to behave the way that they are. If it is easier on them to sit home and do nothing and live off of you, they will. That's human nature on so many levels. And so sometimes you have to make that uncomfortable enough, and I don't know how adult we're talking. I would say under the age of 25, I'm probably going to be pretty patient, which people may be shocked by or think that that's pretty old. But I think the American Journal of Psychology came out like 5 years ago and said adolescence in humans seems to be getting longer, not shorter, and now is identified to the age of 28. So that being said, I think young adult under the age of 25, I'd probably still be pretty patient with them figuring it out, especially in today's age and everything that's going on. If you're under the age of 25 and you can live with your parents and save yourself money to get a better running start on your way out, I'd probably do that. I certainly look back, I left my mom's home when I was 17, and for an entirely different set of reasons. I wish I could have lived with her longer simply because I loved her and I would have loved to have that time with her before she passed away. But I would be looking at creating conditions to help them feel, one, confident in their ability to do it on their own. And a lot of that is set early in life, but certainly you can help change them even as an adult. And then I would wean them off the support, which is going to be the hardest thing to do, right? There's things that we do as parents that we think we're doing out of love and we want to take care of them that are making it harder and harder for them to take care of themselves in the world, and they're taking the path of least resistance. So I don't know that there's an easy answer to this one. It's a painful one, and as a parent, I'm just putting myself in that situation. My kids are still teenagers, and so I'm on the other side of that kind of question where I'm like, man, are my kids going to leave soon? And I'd hope that they stay long enough that they get off to a running start. And so if you're enabling your children, I would ask yourself this question: how am I complicit? How am I responsible for creating this scenario? What am I doing that's making it too easy for them to not leave and take care of themselves? And how can I show up for them in a way that both supports them and gives them the confidence to realize they can do this, and then create a plan to do that. But this is a tough one, and there's a lot of failures to launch right now in our society, and there's a lot of things that we need to address as a people group, societally, and then as a family. How do we do better at preparing people for the quote-unquote real world? So this is more of a discussion than a Q&A answer, and I'm talking without being able to discuss it with you, but this is a tough one, and I'm assuming that's what your question is. What do you do about it? And so only you can decide what you want to do about it, but I'd look at how you got there and then what you want to do about it, and then come up with a plan with your adult child to wean them off that support and explain why it's for their own good.
In a previous live, you mentioned you were raised by a single mom. What would be one piece of advice you would offer to a single mom trying to step into thriving financially or just surviving?
I was raised by a single mom. My brother and I had an incredible mom that worked hard, was very disciplined when it came to her work ethic and execution there. And she did not thrive financially. In fact, part of my motivation, especially early motivation in life to thrive financially, was because I knew what it was like to struggle. I knew what it was like to have every decision be made because of money. As a single mom, you're going to have less time and energy generally, and so you're going to have to learn how to leverage the time and energy you have. And so I would be looking for high value skill sets that are going to pay me more, not based on time, but based on result. It's going to be it's hard for everyone, but it's going to be very hard for you to exchange hours for a paycheck and get ahead financially. You're going to have to find something that you can do that isn't tied necessarily directly to the hours worked, but by the results you are getting. Now, the good news is the time we live in, it has never been easier to find those kinds of skill sets. And there's so much that we can do from home now that make a lot of what I'm saying a lot easier than it was on my mom. I was kind of right in the beginning of the internet age, and certainly we didn't have people working remotely or working from home very much. And so she worked a full-time job and still got home to make us dinner and take care of us, but I don't even know how she would have started a side hustle or another business. She had her hands full. So I applaud you, but I would look at finding high-value skill sets that pay you based on your result, not based on time. The problem with that is it can also feel very, very uncertain and scary, because you're going to get paid for your result. So if you aren't very good, you're probably not going to make very much money until you do get good. And there's risk related to that that can be very challenging for a parent, especially a single parent. This is a question from a coaching perspective I would love to answer, but it's more dialogue than me just monologuing. But that would be principally where I'd start. Hopefully that helps.
Your number one thing you've learned as a parent so far?
Number one thing I've learned as a parent, my children are my greatest teacher. They are reflecting back to me what is in me, because especially when our children are young, meaning before the age of 7, most of their behavior is observed or learned. There are some things that come in through genetic memory and come through biology, but a lot of the behavior is indoctrination by adults. And so how we show up is going to have a massive impact on our kids. If we're impatient, we're modeling impatience, you can expect your kids are likely going to do the same. If we're undisciplined, they're going to be undisciplined. If we're careless with our words, they're likely going to be careless with our words, which is one of the reasons why our kids can get under our skin so quickly, because they really are forcing us to look in the mirror. And a lot of times we're scared to do that. And so then we get irritated by what they're showing us. And sadly, very often we see parents take that out on their children. But the biggest lesson I've learned as a parent is that my kids are my greatest teacher, and I'm so thankful for every single one of them and the lessons they've taught me.
Your thoughts on population decline, and if we're going into a population collapse and all of those things.
Yeah, this was interesting. When I was in high school and college, we expected the United States population, by the time I was my age, to be closer to 400 million plus. It has generally stayed the same as when I was a child. We're still in the low 300 millions, which I think is interesting. So that got me interested in understanding why, and were people migrating other places, or were they going other places? And that's not true. Speaking the United States perspective here real quick, but the United States is still the number one country that people immigrate to. And in fact, if we didn't have immigration to the United States, we would be full on in population decline in the United States. Most of the growth we're seeing in population is because of immigrants. Elon, who I'm generally a big fan of, was kind of somebody who recently breached this topic and said, hey, for all the people worrying about overpopulation, the risk of underpopulation or population decline is far greater. And he explains the math and the data in a couple of different podcasts I saw. One, and he talks about this and he unpacked the math. So I went and researched it myself, and there does seem to be some pretty credible data that would suggest that's a bigger issue. And the reason why it's not obvious at the moment is that as a whole, we haven't had any major population resets, meaning we haven't had any significant pandemics that killed off a massive population of people. We haven't had a world war that often resets population and often has some negative but ultimately positive impacts on society, because it gives us opportunity to reset systems that are no longer working. And people are living longer, so it kind of hides the fact that the younger generations have less people relative to who they're supporting now. That creates some pretty big issues. So I do think this is a significant issue. I think that more research needs to be done. I don't necessarily think a smaller population on Earth is a negative per se. However, if all the systems and infrastructure we've built predicate that we have a larger population and we need a larger population in order for it to succeed, we may want to look at how do we create systems that support that. And I think AI and robotics are probably going to be part of that, which is super interesting. But I think that we're in a pretty interesting time in society, and within a generation or two, we're going to see major upheaval in our systems and a lot of change, and population decline might be one of those things that drives the behavior.